Chapter 1. Lilah checked the address once again, juggling her phone awkwardly with one hand, since the other was occupied with a baby carrier. The 6-month-old baby she was delivering to his new guardian was adorable and blessedly calm, but he was also heavy. The baby squirmed in his seat. "It's okay, sweetheart, we're almost there," Lilah cooed. She swung him back and forth gently, even though the action made the ruts the carrier was digging into her forearm even worse. When she was sure this was the address, she stepped up to the intercom system and pressed the buzzer for PH, preparing to go into her usual spiel to explain why she was there. To her surprise, the resident, Mr. Marc Campbell, didn't even ask, as the building's front door unlocked with a satisfying click. "Well, that was easier than expected," she addressed the baby boy, who was now smiling up at her. "It's blessedly cool in here, too." A blast of super-chilled air hit her in the face, and she closed her eyes gratefully. She headed to the waiting elevator, the carrier smacking her in the thigh with every step, and pressed the PH button. The baby's eyes widened at the upward motion of the elevators, and he kicked his feet in excitement. He was such a doll, which is why she'd volunteered to bring him to his guardian, even though she'd already cleared out her desk at Child Services. She sighed. She was jobless after today, but she'd be okay. "We'll both be fine, you'll see," she said to the baby and to herself. Moments later, the elevator doors swished open into a wide marble vestibule. An enormous bank of windows afforded a view of the skyline. She paused to gasp. A stunning view like this, and all for one person. "Can I help you?" Lilah turned and gasped again. As beautiful as the view was, it had nothing on the man in front of her. He was the kind of handsome that made her have to look away quickly to hide the flush in her cheeks. It almost hurt to look at him. "Are you Marc Campbell?" He nodded, a small furrow springing up between the twin slashes of his brows. "When you buzzed, I assumed you were bringing up the Chinese food I had ordered." She couldn't place his accent. Irish? Scottish? He looked at the carrier on her arm. "Are you sure you're in the right place?" "Positive. This is Grayson Clark. He's 6 months old." "Okay." Marc gave her a blank look. "Are congratulations in order then, Miss?" This was always the worst part. Lilah tried to soften her words with a smile, but she knew there was no way of saying this kindly. "Diaz. Laila Diaz. I work for ACS, the Association of Child Services. This child was turned over to us by his nanny today, after his parents were killed in a car accident. The one with the tanker truck in Fort Lee. You might have seen it on the news." Marc shook his head. "I haven't been keeping up with the local news this week. You said Clark, though, right?" She nodded sympathetically. "Grayson's parents were named Remy and Kendra Clark." Marc reached out to the wall to steady himself. "Remy," he breathed. "I'm so sorry to be the one to tell you this news." Marc blinked and then shook his head as if to clear it. No, I understand. It's just..." He pointed to the infant carrier. "They had a son." Lilah nodded again. "And they named you as his guardian should anything happen to them. You didn't know?" Marc's shoulder hit the wall, which may have been the only thing that kept him upright. His face had gone pure white, which answered her question. "Mr. Campbell, I am sorry to be so abrupt. We've tried to reach out multiple times over the last few weeks, but haven't been able to get in touch with you. There really is no good way to deliver news like this." She swallowed a little because it was true. This was the part of the job she'd always hated the most. Knowing she'd never have to do it again almost made getting abruptly laid off this morning a relief. Almost, but not quite. "I thought this might come as a shock to you, so I took the liberty of bringing you some supplies to get you through the night," she told him hurriedly. She set the carrier down on the marble floor and held out the reusable bag on her arm. "A pack of diapers, enough formula for the night, a clean onesie, and some binkies. I don't know if he likes binkies or not yet." She set the bag down next to the carrier and looked at the still, quiet child, feeling her heart lurch in sadness to admit there was not much else she could say about this child. She didn't know anything at all. "It's my understanding that the Clark's will is still going through probate, but they left everything to Grayson, so once the paperwork has been sorted, you'll have access to all of his assets to provide for his care. If you require the estate to forward you some funds for his expenses until then..." Not that Marc looked like he was hurting for money, living in his clearly luxurious penthouse in NoHo, but still, it was part of her job to run through the explanation. "You can reach out to the executor of the Clark estate. I have that woman's information right here. She's a lawyer in Montclair, supposed to have a very good reputation." She reached into her purse, pulled out the crumpled Post-it note, and held it out to Marc. He did not take it. Lilah looked up into his ashen face and immediately checked herself. In the span of 2 heartbeats, he had not only found out he'd been named guardian to an infant he'd never met, but also that a friend had passed away tragically. How dare she be so impatient while he processed this news? "I am sorry for hitting you so much at once," she said, feeling that same tight band of sadness envelop her heart that always gripped her when she confronted the sorrows of this world. Her fingers ached to touch his arm and give him a reassuring squeeze, but she had no right to do so. She needed to stay professional. "You're fine," Marc said in a gruff, tight voice. "You did nothing wrong. You're just doing your job." Maybe so, but Lilah was too much of a bleeding heart not to empathize with this man. She gently set the carrier down at her feet and flexed her fingers before telling him, "I wish I could do more to help, but I'm afraid today was my last day with ACS. If you do have any follow-up questions, I'm sure the remaining staff would be happy to help you. But they might not be the fastest with a response." Budget cutbacks meant getting rid of a number of jobs, including hers. The people who remained would be incredibly overstretched, as if they weren't already. "Things are a bit hectic in the office at the moment. Part of the reason I wanted to be sure to bring him over today as my last task was because I was afraid that if I didn't get Grayson to you right now, he might slip through the cracks and end up in foster care." She crouched down to gaze fondly at the infant, who was sleeping open-mouthed, a small puddle of drool collecting in the folds by his chin. She couldn't help smiling at him. "And we couldn't have you getting overlooked, little man," she finished quietly. When she looked back up, Marc stood in front of her, one arm bent upward as he slowly rubbed the back of his neck. There was a haunted, hollow look to his expression. Then he seemed to pull himself together right before her eyes. "Would you mind coming in?" he asked her, stepping back to allow her the first glimpse she'd gotten of the penthouse behind him. "If you could watch him for just a wee while longer so I could make some phone calls, I'd appreciate it." Then he winced. "I'm sorry, you said this was your last task on your last day. Do you need to be going? Am I keeping you from anything?" "No, not at all," she said. "I don't mind staying with him a bit longer." She made to lift the carrier again, but before she could complete the motion, Marc scooped it up and beckoned for her to continue inside. It was an oddly chivalrous gesture, and Lilah found herself charmed, then a little embarrassed about getting charmed by something so basic as helpfulness. Without the carrier, she felt strangely light as she entered his apartment, almost dizzy even, although that might have had more to do with the stunning view in front of her than anything else. A bank of windows so clean they looked like there was nothing between her and the sky revealed the streetscape below, backed by much of the lower Manhattan skyline. In the setting sun, a tiny wisp of cloud curled around the antenna of the far-off World Trade Center tower, its edges tinged pink like the cotton candy. Unexpectedly, it drew a long-lost memory of a trip to the Jersey Shore when her foster parents had brought her a stick of wispy and completely delicious candy floss. Lilah mentally shook herself, forcibly yanking her thoughts back to the present day, and looked around her. From somewhere deep in the penthouse, Marc's voice rumbled in low, tense tones. She strained to listen for a moment. His accent had grown thicker, making it difficult for her to understand much of what he was saying. She could only determine that he must be speaking to his lawyer, before Grayson stirred in his carrier, drawing her attention. The infant scrunched his nose comically as he struggled against the straps. His chubby fist flew upward, and Lilah immediately hurried over to where Marc had set the carrier down on the marble floor of the foyer. "Shh," she hushed, touching his face. "Oh, you're all sweaty," she noted with dismay. "Let's get you out of there." She hefted him into her arms, and he curled his whole body into her, nuzzling at her neck a moment before fussing a little and balling his fist to rub his eyes. Lilah looked around for something to catch his attention, but everything in this apartment looked far too expensive to have a baby even breathe near, much less play with. She was about to start singing when she felt a tug at her neck. "You like that?" she asked him. Grayson's eyes were so thoroughly focused they were close to crossing as he closed his greedy little fist around the simple pendant she always wore around her neck. "Don't pull too hard, okay? Gentle," she said, holding his hand to show him the right amount of pressure he needed to investigate the shiny object. "It doesn't have any real meaning, I just think it looks nice. What do you think? No, not in your mouth, though." "Sorry for making you wait." Startled, Lilah turned to Marc. She'd been so focused on Grayson that she must have missed him wrapping up his call. "That's fine," she said, shifting Grayson to her other hip so she could turn to him. "For me, anyway. How about you?" Marc let out another one of those long breaths. This news is coming at a difficult time. He paused and then laughed ruefully. Although, truth be told, I can't think of when a good time to receive news like this would be. But I need to double-check a few things because my family and I are leaving on a 6-week cruise tomorrow. 6 weeks? Lilah echoed. A vacation lasting 6 weeks. He may as well have told her he was flying to the moon. It was just a foreign concept. Yes, Marc said. Everything's been arranged and it's too late to cancel now. But now I have a parent in mind. He finished, his voice rising incredulously. She had never heard an actual person say that word aloud in regular conversation, but she had watched Outlander devotedly, so now at least she knew that Marc was Scottish. It's a lot. She had to sympathize. She'd spent the past few weeks feeling like all of her life's plans had been thrown into chaos too, though her circumstances had been markedly different. When she'd come to New York a year ago to move in with the long-distance boyfriend she'd met online, everything in her life had seemed on track. She was in a good relationship with a successful man, and she quickly found a job at ACS. When Brian proposed, it all seemed picture perfect. Then she'd come home to find her fiancé in bed with another woman, and the relationship she'd counted on fell apart in an instant. She got to keep the apartment when he moved out, but that wasn't much of a benefit since she couldn't afford it on her salary. The salary she wouldn't have after today, thanks to budget cuts and restructuring. She liked to believe she was capable of handling anything life threw at her, but lately life had been throwing with both hands. She was doing her best to turn her wipeout into a controlled turn. She was looking into finding a new, more affordable place for herself and subletting her current apartment until the lease ran out. And she had a good lead on a new job, the director position at the new community center going up in Queens. Unfortunately, they were still finalizing the building and had not yet moved to the interviewing stage, which made Lilah nervous. The woman she'd spoken with had assured her that she was a shoo-in for the job, but getting hired likely wouldn't happen until 2 months from now, and she honestly didn't know how she'd get by until then. She'd figure it out, though. She had to. Marc didn't know this, of course, but he looked like he was having trouble breathing, the same way she'd felt for the past month. They had that in common. The difference was that, for her, a 6-week cruise sounded like heaven, and the way he'd said it made it sound like the 7th circle of hell. I understand that you need some time, Lilah said, disentangling Grayson's fingers from her necklace chain. I can get Grayson set up with a foster home. Absolutely not, Marc interrupted immediately. I'm not a complete idiot when it comes to children. I have younger cousins. I can manage. He reached out to hold Grayson. As swoon-worthy as this display of paternal responsibility was, Lilah was reluctant to let go of the baby. Marc must have noticed this because he dropped his hands and chuckled. Would it make you feel better if I tell you I have my parents staying here tonight and they can back me up? Lilah smiled. Maybe a little. Then my parents are staying here. Mum and Dad are out to dinner right now, enjoying their night on the town. He paused and frowned. This will put a bit of a damper on their evening. Will your parents help you with him while on the cruise? Lilah wondered. They would, but that wouldn't be fair since it's supposed to be a holiday for them. No, I'll need to find a nanny for the cruise. Dedicated eyes on the lad seemed like a better idea than me just winging it. A rueful smile stretched across his face. And I have a solid 18 hours to do that before we sail. Nothing to worry about, eh? He finished, glancing at Lilah. Lilah couldn't help laughing along with him. Super easy. I mean, you have someone experienced with kids who just happens to be unemployed right here in your foyer. You don't even need the 18 hours. Marc's eyes went wide. For a few moments, Lilah could only smile back at him stupidly. Why was he looking at her like that? Why wasn't he laughing at the funny joke she just made? You're hired, he blurted. What? Lilah stared at him, then shook her head. No, I mean, thank you and everything, but I was just kidding around. You don't know me from Adam. You worked for Child Services. I assume you've been checked out once or twice, Marc said. Were you fired for negligence? Absolutely not, Lilah huffed. I wasn't fired at all. I was laid off due to budget cutbacks. Grand. Would you submit to another background check just to be sure? And a rush drug test too, of course. I can get one within the hour. Yes, but... And you have a passport? Shite, I should have asked that first. She and Brian had planned a trip to the British Virgin Islands for their honeymoon. Yes, she sighed. I have a passport. Then you're hired. Are you sure? She still couldn't quite believe it. But within an hour, Lilah signed the contract Marc's lawyer drew up and emailed over, stipulating that she was being hired on, for a magnificent sum, to serve as a nanny for a 6-week cruise across the Atlantic. Pretty amazing for a foster kid who'd never left the tri-state area. You look like you're in shock, Marc said kindly once she had set her pen down. There's nothing to be worried about. It'll be fun. Right then, Grayson let out a blood-curdling wail, and Lilah rushed to her new charge's side, wondering what she'd gotten both of them into.